I discovered my husband had been drugging my coffee for years to make me seem unstable during our divorce. The morning I finally understood what had been happening to me for 3 years started like any other, except I accidentally grabbed his coffee mug instead of mine. Within 20 minutes, I felt sharper than I had in years, like fog lifting from my brain. The constant fatigue, memory lapses, and dizzy spells that had plagued me suddenly made terrifying sense. For months leading up to our separation, I had been documenting what I thought were signs of early onset dementia or some neurological condition. I would forget conversations we had just had, lose track of time for hours, and feel like I was walking through quicksand most days. My friends started treating me differently, like I was fragile or unreliable. The divorce proceedings had been brutal because I kept forgetting important details about our finances, our timeline, even basic facts about our marriage. My lawyer seemed frustrated with me, constantly having to repeat information I should have remembered. I felt like I was losing my mind, which made me question everything about myself. That morning, when I grabbed his mug by mistake, everything clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The coffee he made me every morning as a loving gesture had been the source of my deteriorating mental state. I started connecting dots I hadn't seen before: how he always insisted on bringing me coffee in bed, how he got angry when I suggested switching to tea, how my symptoms were always worse in the mornings. I called my sister immediately, my hands shaking as I explained what I suspected. She reminded me that she had been worried about my sudden personality changes over the past few years. I had gone from being sharp and organized to scattered and forgetful, seemingly overnight. She had even suggested I see a doctor, which I did, but all my tests came back normal. The next few days were a blur of secret planning and careful observation. I pretended to drink the coffee he made me, but secretly poured it into a thermos when he wasn't looking. Each day I felt more like myself, more alert, more capable of thinking clearly. The difference was so dramatic that I knew I had to get proof. I took samples of the coffee to a lab for testing, telling them I suspected contamination. The results came back showing traces of a mild sedative that would cause exactly the symptoms I had been experiencing. My heart broke and my rage grew simultaneously as I realized the depth of his manipulation. What made it worse was remembering all the times he had expressed concern about my mental state to our friends and family. He would shake his head sadly and talk about how worried he was about me, how I wasn't the same person he married. Everyone felt sorry for him, the devoted husband dealing with a wife who was clearly struggling with some kind of mental health issue. I kept quiet about my discovery while I consulted with a new lawyer, one who specialized in cases involving domestic abuse. She explained that what he had done constituted assault and could completely change the dynamics of our divorce case. We developed a strategy to gather more evidence while keeping him unaware of what I knew. The hardest part was pretending everything was normal while living with someone who had been systematically poisoning me. I had to act like I was still the confused, forgetful woman he had created, while secretly documenting everything. I started recording our conversations and taking photos of the coffee preparation process. One evening, I confronted him directly, but not about the drugging. I told him I was feeling much better lately, and that I thought we should try couples counseling before finalizing the divorce. His reaction was immediate and telling. He became agitated and insisted that I was still clearly unwell and needed individual help first. That night, I found a small vial hidden in his desk drawer. Along with research he had printed about the effects of long-term exposure to the substance he had been using. He had been carefully calculating dosages and timing to maximize the impact on my cognitive function. The premeditation was chilling. I realized he had been planning this for years, probably since before he even asked for the divorce. He had been systematically destroying my credibility and my sense of self to ensure he would come out ahead in the settlement. The man I had loved and trusted had been my worst enemy. The breakthrough came when I discovered he had been secretly recording our conversations during my worst moments, when I was most confused and disoriented. He had hours of footage of me seeming unstable, forgetful, and emotional. This was his insurance policy to prove I was unfit and unreliable. I spent weeks gathering evidence with my lawyer's help, including having my blood tested to show traces of the substance still in my system. We also interviewed friends and family who could testify about the dramatic change in my behavior and cognitive function during the period he had been drugging me. The confrontation happened in my lawyer's office with his lawyer present. When we presented the evidence, his face went white and his lawyer immediately requested a private consultation. The arrogance he had shown throughout the divorce proceedings evaporated instantly. What followed was a complete reversal of our divorce settlement negotiations. Instead of him getting the majority of our assets because I seemed incompetent, I was now in the position of power. The evidence of his systematic abuse and assault changed everything about how the court would view our case. The most satisfying moment was when I had to testify about the impact his actions had on my life. I was sharp, articulate, and compelling in a way I hadn't been in years. The judge could see the dramatic difference between the woman in the courtroom and the one described in his documentation. My family was devastated when they learned what had been happening. They felt guilty for not recognizing the signs or for sometimes doubting my capabilities during that period. My sister cried when she realized how often she had attributed my confusion to stress or hormones. The criminal charges were filed separately, and he eventually pleaded guilty to avoid a trial. The local news picked up the story, and I was amazed by how many other women reached out to share similar experiences. Apparently, this type of abuse is more common than anyone realizes. Recovery has been a long process, not just physically but emotionally. I had to rebuild my confidence and trust in my own perceptions. For months, I second-guessed every decision and every memory, wondering what was real and what was influenced by the drugs. The financial settlement was generous, but what mattered more was having my sense of self restored. I could think clearly, remember conversations, and feel like the intelligent, capable woman I had always been. The fog that had clouded my mind for years was finally gone. I moved to a different state to start fresh, somewhere he couldn't find me easily. The restraining order provided legal protection, but I needed geographical distance to feel truly safe. I bought a small house with a garden and began the process of rediscovering who I was without his influence. One of the unexpected challenges was learning to trust my own judgment again. I had been gaslit so thoroughly that I questioned everything about my perceptions and memories. It took time to distinguish between genuine uncertainty and the learned helplessness he had cultivated in me. I started keeping a detailed journal to track my thoughts and experiences, partly to monitor my recovery and partly to have proof of my mental clarity. Reading back through entries from months earlier, I could see the dramatic improvement in my cognitive function and emotional stability. The legal proceedings took almost a year to fully resolve, but every step felt like reclaiming my life. I had forensic accountants examine our finances and discovered he had been hiding assets and manipulating our accounts long before the divorce began. The drugging was just one part of a much larger scheme. Some days I felt anger so intense it scared me, thinking about all the time I lost feeling confused and inadequate. Other days I felt profound sadness for the person I had been, struggling with symptoms I couldn't understand or control. But mostly, I felt grateful to have discovered the truth. The most unexpected twist came when his lawyer contacted 9 months after the settlement was finalized. Apparently, he had been doing similar things to his previous wife, and she was considering pressing charges based on our case. The pattern of abuse was more extensive than anyone had realized. I decided to testify in her case, even though it meant reliving some difficult memories. She deserved justice, and I wanted to help prevent him from doing this to anyone else. Her story was eerily similar to mine, right down to the morning coffee routine and the gradual onset of cognitive symptoms. Meeting her was both healing and heartbreaking. We compared notes about his methods and his justifications, and the similarities were chilling. He had clearly refined his approach over time, learning from his previous experience to be more effective with me. Now, almost 2 years later, I feel like I'm finally living in my own skin again. I wake up each morning with a clear head and make my own coffee, savoring both the taste and the symbolism. I've started dating again, though trust comes slowly and carefully. The experience changed how I see the world and relationships. I'm more aware of subtle forms of manipulation and control, and I trust my instincts in ways I never did before. I've also become an advocate for other women dealing with similar situations. Sometimes, I wonder how different my life might have been if I had never grabbed his coffee mug that morning. The thought terrifies me because I might have continued living in that fog indefinitely, never understanding what was happening to me. The most important lesson I learned is that our minds and bodies often know something is wrong before we can articulate it. I had felt like something was off for years, but I kept dismissing those feelings because I trusted him more than I trusted myself. Today, I prioritize my own perceptions and experiences above anyone else's version of reality. I've learned that love should never come at the cost of your sanity or your sense of self. True partnership means supporting each other's growth and clarity, not creating confusion and dependence. I still have moments of doubt and anxiety, especially when I'm tired or stressed. But now I recognize these as normal human experiences rather than signs of mental instability. The difference between genuine uncertainty and manufactured confusion is something I'll never take for granted again. Looking back, I can see how many red flags I missed or rationalized away. His need to control my daily routine, his insistence on certain rituals, his subtle undermining of my confidence. All of these were part of a larger pattern that I couldn't see at the time. The legal victory was satisfying, but the personal victory of reclaiming my mind and my life was infinitely more valuable. I am stronger, wiser, and more self-aware than I ever was before this experience. In a strange way, surviving this ordeal taught me things about myself I might never have learned otherwise. My advice to anyone reading this is to trust your instincts when something feels wrong, even if you can't explain why. Document changes in your health or behavior, and don't be afraid to seek second opinions. Most importantly, remember that you deserve relationships built on honesty and respect, not manipulation and control. The coffee mug that started my journey to the truth now sits in my kitchen cabinet, a reminder of how quickly life can change when we pay attention to the details. Every morning when I see it, I'm grateful for the accident that opened my eyes and gave me back my life.